Welcome, everybody. This is Left Reckoning. My name is David Griscom. I'm here with Matt Leck.
Hello.
And this afternoon, actually, we're going to be doing a kind of read-through and analysis of one of my favorite texts by Marx, the Critique of the Gotha Program. So thank you all so much for being patient, really into this text today.
Thanks, everybody.
We're going to try to do this in a way that even if you haven't read the text, you can still follow along with the main arguments. But I highly suggest taking a little bit of time, to read this in its full. It's a pretty short text in general. I mean, you can probably read it through in like 40 minutes or so. And it's just like, so no one gets discouraged. I just want, because, sometimes I talk to people and tell them, you need to read Marx, all this kind of things. And people, will respond and say, oh, it's really difficult. Yeah, it's difficult, for us too. These texts are really rich and there's a lot going on, which is why, in my experience, it's always better to, consistently like revisit these kind of critical texts, because it's difficult for me. And I've read this text multiple times. And even now I'm finding more and more things within it. So, reading and doing theory and, studying philosophy is really a process.
I second that. Rereading is really reading.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
Like if a text is going to be really important to you, it's not going to be that important on the very first read. I think that's a myth that's helpful to capitalism, that makes you consume like entertainment and worry about like the very first experience you have with something. But yeah, no, you need to revisit this stuff.
Yeah, you're never going to read a text and then, the heavens are going to open up.
Yeah, don't spoil the Communist Manifesto for me.
Yeah, exactly. Well, anyways, let's get to this text. So people understand essentially what this text is Marx is criticizing the Gotha Program, which is a program that was set to be accepted by the merging of two major German socialist parties. And they really break from a lot of the kind of Marxist communist tradition that was, that was quite viable in Europe at that time. I'm going to butcher the Latin. But he ends the text with a Latin phrase that says, I have spoken and saved my soul, which, Marx is not usually the one to use religious language like that. But essentially, he's doing this because he is recognizing, both him and Engels, that they are going to be thought of as responsible for this text, that people are going to, because they are so critical in the German, socialist movement, that people are going to think that they were the authors or behind it. So he's really writing this text, one, to set these, these parties straight, to set this movement straight, and also to very much, draw a line in the sand and say that this is not Marxism. This is not even socialism. In fact, he argues that it's quite reactionary. That's the basics of what we're criticizing. And we're just going to go through the sections and sort of add our analysis and sort of build on Marx's arguments here. So why not just like jump right into it? The first tenet of the Gotha Program is this line: labor is the source of wealth and all culture. And since useful labor is possible only in society and through society, the proceeds of labor belong undiminished with equal right to all members of society. And Marx begins his takedown of this text with an immediate renunciation of that first premise by saying labor is not the source of all wealth. Nature plays a huge role as well. And, he's not doing this to be really nitpicky. He's doing this because the understanding of capitalism and the labor struggle and the plight of working people that is put forward in the Gotha Program is just extremely erroneous, particularly this kind of supernatural treatment of labor, which is something that Marx is very critical of in this first section. He argues that this kind of understanding of labor is bourgeois. He argues that, this is a supernatural definition of labor. And what does he mean by that? He means that it completely masks the relationship of the worker and the productive apparatus that they are living in, namely capitalism, and create some kind of mystical understanding of labor. Because what is it that labor does that creates all this wealth? Well, wealth is created because it goes through society, because it goes through capitalism, and that is because going through capitalism, you're creating a commodity, right, which has a use value, but it also has an exchange value. And that is the capitalist addition to the production process that is really critical if you are aiming to fundamentally change society. That you need to understand why society functions in the way that it does, and why does labor function the way that it does under capitalism.
Yeah, and should we just return to the? Do we go over enough the marrying of these two parties that had to force this program? So you basically had the SDP in Germany, right? Mm-hmm. The Social Democrats, and then the Lassalleans that Marx references here, which are, I guess, like from the footnotes, they're a landlord aligned, like socialist or I don't know, progressive. What I don't know how you define that, basically. But like, and in this very first part, right? Like, labor is a source of all wealth. That fuzziness kind of helps that obscure those sort of landlord portions of it, right? Because Marx says like nature also. And I can remember before I accepted the label of Marxist myself, encountering it in this sort of reductive way, thinking this is what Marx believed, that labor is the source of all wealth. And it forced me into this sort of like destiny logic lord position of being like, well, Marx, what about all the stuff we get from nature, right? And like literally, and this is like maybe 2012, 2013, thinking like, well, that's one thing that Marx didn't know. And to see him late in life be like, have to like invoke Latin, and I'm trying to save my soul as people are putting these words in his mouth or so, but is so like kind of depressing. But it is interesting that like, yeah, in obscuring nature's role, you're also kind of obscuring the landlord who's aligned with these the people that are watering down this program.
Yeah, exactly. And, and like the land aspect of it is really critical. And you see that there was a political reason why those parties were trying to avoid that, because they were trying to build this, movement of, workers and like landlords and massive, landholders, essentially, the remnants of, the feudal state or the feudal system as well. But yeah, so like there's that. And then there's also like this really critical definition too, that he starts to try to articulate in this first criticism of the first line of the Gotha program, is that, again, what it does is it obscures the relation of the worker to the productive system. How do we mean that? Under capitalism, what happens is you destroy the commons, right? You destroy people's ability to basically provide for themselves. You turn everything into a commodity. And if you don't own property, or if you're not a capitalist, what does that mean? You have to sell your labor, right? That's a societal force that fundamentally changes the act of just like creating something. And this is really what Marx is trying to hit at, is that not only are there political reasons why this is, devastating, and, they're making a bad analysis essentially of like the way that the capital system functions, but it also obscures the shifts happened in labor under capitalism. And the ruling class works really hard to try to obscure this fundamental relation and to try to make it as fuzzy and complicated as possible, because they don't want people to start to recognize that, the working people are the people who are critical to the productive system of capitalism, but they don't, share in its benefit fully. And should we go into the second bit?
I think we got enough out of the very first bit, but I do. One thing I do like about this is how Marx gets in the mode of like a bitchy editor. And like he spends so much time on just pulling something apart. I think that's something every one of us can sort of relate to, having to like sort of, not with, party programs as much, but like having to choke down New York Times op-eds. And just like every single line is infinitely objectionable. But yeah, let's continue.
No, it's so good. And Marx has a great line as he transitions into the second part of his critique, where he says, let us now leave this sentence as it stands, or rather limps. Marx is, being really, really snippy throughout this text. It's really fun to read, honestly. But the second part of the paragraph is this line, that useful labor is possible only in society and through society. Well, first, this sentence contradicts itself. If labor is the source of all wealth and culture, what is this new distinction about useful labor? Right now we're having a new category of labor, which again, this is not just trying to be super, technical, but it's really pointing out that the people who are putting together this, this program weren't really thinking in a kind of systemic way about what they were talking about or writing about.
Well, he comes up on it here, and you can kind of give us more of the background here, but he mentions one could just as well have said that only in society can useless and even socially harmful labor become a branch of gainful occupation, that only in a society can one live by being idle, etc., etc. In short, one could just as well have copied the whole of Rousseau. It does seem like it is sort of like an inversion of Rousseau, basically, and under the guise of we're socialists.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And essentially what they're arguing here is that since useful labor is possible only in society, the wealth that is generated from that, using their terms, useful labor, belongs to society to allow that system to reproduce itself. And Marx again makes this really critical point that this kind of understanding actually doesn't even add anything new to like the bourgeois understanding of production under capitalism. He makes the argument, is this not a definition, that the bourgeoisie could twist? Do they not believe that the payments to the ruling class, to the capitalist, to the tax man, and to the state, and all these other forms, all of these things that basically eat into the wealth that is created by, working people, do they not believe that these are necessary payments to continue to allow this society to function, right? And
yeah, you could defend like JFK's like ask not what your country can do for you, what you can do for your country using this logic,
exactly.
Right?
It's so
like there's no useful labor without us, guys. Get something going for us.
It's so squishy. And this is again, like, just to take a little step back, why I think this text is really important is because we have to understand that in our position as socialists, what we're trying to do is fundamentally change the system as it works. And what that means is we have to have a very robust understanding of how the system works and how it affects us. And if you use these kind of sloppy definitions, even though, right, these kind of, they feel when you read them to be socialist statements, when you look under the hood, you recognize that one, they're incredibly, fuzzy and inaccurate. And secondly, are something that if you create this as your party platform, you are giving ammunition to your opponents to basically say like, oh, look, we understand that we're doing the same thing, right? That we understand that, and that's why we have these kind of social functions that we do. And, Marx basically, fixes this and tries to fix it, does his best to fix it by saying, what they should have said is under society, you can actually engage in useless or harmful labor and have that be gainful employment, right? He's just saying like, if that's what you mean, then that's an unobjectionable statement. So yeah, let's go into this, this third bit here too, yeah, where they sort of add on to this. So they say, useful labor is possible only in society and through society. The proceeds of labor belong undiminished with equal right to all members of society. Again, so this is the same, the first, bit that Marx was criticizing is like, do not the bourgeois believe that they can, create this, that they, the payments that go to them, the wealth that goes to them are necessary to reproducing that society. So he goes through that again. And then he makes this, addition that they should have, basically corrects them again and says, what they're talking about is the difference between, what they're calling labor in itself and social labor. And what does that mean is that labor has existed since all of human history. Like this is not something new that capitalism has created, right? We've been creating objects and doing work, obviously, since we've lived in society. What they're trying to get at and what socialists are trying to get at is what Marx is calling now social labor, which is the labor that creates the wealth and culture. And that's different from isolated labor, which can only create use value. And what happens to the isolated labor or labor in general under capital becomes social labor. This transformation essentially is that before you create something to use it, right, you get your use value from that. And, for people who aren't familiar with that term, use value is literally just means, what you use something for. So a house has use value, right? You live in it. It also has under capitalism exchange value, what its worth is, how much you can sell it for. And that's where society basically enters into the labor process under capitalism, is by introducing exchange value to the production process, which fundamentally changes the character of our labor. I think that's a really critical point. And then he moves into this new, this new criticism next, where they say, in present day society, the instruments of labor are the monopoly of the capitalist class. The resulting dependence of the working class is the cause of misery and servitude in all forms. And this is what we were talking about earlier. he omits a very critical, a really critical actor in capitalism, which is landowners, which are no small part of the system, right? I mean, if you're talking about, in the kind of Marxist understanding of society, you lose the ability to survive under capitalism without working and then having to use the wage that you earn to pay to continue to live. And the fact that, working people are essentially landless and have to rent out spaces is a huge factor. And the fact that there are also, especially in Europe at this time, are just, small families that own majority parts of the country. That's a huge aspect of the capital system that they just completely gloss over, as Matt was mentioning earlier, because Lassalle was trying to build this very strange relationship between the working class and the in society.
Yeah, sorry, you cut out a little bit there at the end, but I do want to go over this part where Marx comes in because, the present-day society, the instruments of labor are the monopoly of the capitalist class, the resulting dependence. That is, it sounds good, right? Until you think like there are other classes besides just the capitalists. There's the landowners. And Marx says a couple paragraphs later, the correction was introduced because Lassalle, for reasons now generally known, attacked only the capitalist class and not the landowners. In England, the capitalist class is usually not even the owner of the land on which the factory stands. I love the understatement here. I think Engels says that he, I believe in the preface to this, he says that he edited out some of the more caustic attacks that Marx made because Marx would have done it himself. But I love the understatement that sort of survives there for reasons now generally known, right? Like you can say that about like the Center for American Progress and like United Arab Emirates stories, right? Or Bloomberg, right? For reasons generally now known, they left the Bloomberg section out of the police brutality document. I love it. That's why it is like I think it's a mistake to tell people to start with capital when they read Marx. Honestly, like I think there's a certain type of person whose brain loves that challenge, but I think having the context and seeing some of the personality makes you like sort of cultivates you to take on that project. And that's what I've thought of when I've read 18th Brumaire, and that's why I thought of reading this too. I don't know where you stand on that.
No, I think 100%. And actually, just take a sidestep too. This is why this text is really important. I think some of the more critical texts you can read of Marx are the Communist Manifesto, which is one you really you can't skip because he lays out this incredible historical critique of Kant, and obviously lays out a lot of his theory there. But this text I think is really great because in critique, Marxism stands stronger. Like in critique, you can actually see, and we're going to start getting into that, where Marx actually talks about what a communist society would actually look like, because being able to juxtapose that with this kind of sloppy socialism really gives you a sharpened understanding of the Marxist criticism and why it's so effective. One thing too, I also wanted to mention about this text, a lot of people really do like to historicize this text, right? And we're trying to avoid that in this conversation because, one thing you have to understand about Marxism in particular is that it's not a static philosophy. It's quite dynamic. And it's constantly in motion because it's reacting and trying to understand the world as it is around you, right? So a kind of socialist understanding of society is going to be different in 2020 than it was when Marx wrote this text in, I believe, 1875. So we wanted to just try to move it away from focusing too much on like these very particular inter-party or extra-party struggles that are going on, and really focus on the criticism that the fundamental criticism that he's making of these kind of understandings, because we all fall into these. Like, I don't read Critique of the Gotha Program and read all of these statements and immediately have a visceral reaction like, oh, these are bad. But it's once you start thinking about them in a really Marxist way, and then having Marx as a guide to go through it, you recognize, okay, these are kind of sloppy constructions that I'm also using in my own political analysis as well.
Yeah, I think that is really the super important point. It just helps your pattern recognition, because things can slip under, and it's often motivated, right? Things rarely get like this program here. Things rarely get like fuzzed up and obscured and watered down in a way that's helpful. Right? It always seems to be rebound to some interest, but as long as you understand the patterns of how these things get sort of fuzzed up, I mean, we're dealing with this all the time, right? Access to healthcare. We all know these sorts of games. Yeah, like I think this is so much of dealing with like how these politics get co-opted by, I guess, a landowner aligned social movement.
And, it's also worth noting that, what happens to all of these socialist parties in Europe? I mean, they end up, one failing at their goal of, building socialism, and functionally, a lot of them end up just becoming, organs of the state and organs of capitalism as well. And these things have their root here. These things have their root in these kind of sloppy understandings that actually not only are they just bad analysis, they functionally suppress, liberation or working class movements because they don't recognize the society that they're in. And this next section actually really, I think, hits at it well, and it's probably one of the most important criticisms that Marx makes in this text.
Is this the equal rights section we're getting to now?
Yeah, the proceeds of labor. The emancipation of labor demands the promotion of the instruments of labor to the common property of society and the cooperative regulation of the total labor with the fair distribution of the proceeds of labor. So this is honestly, Lassalle and the Gotha Program coming out with what they imagine an emancipation of labor to be. And functionally, what that is one, Marx jokes that the promotion of the instruments of labor, using the word promotion, shows that they're not really thinking about this as like a kind of, from like a historical dialectic perspective, right? The promotion, he says, is the wrong way to think about it. It's something that grows out of it. But anyways, that's, the bigger argument here that he makes is, what are the proceeds of labor? Is it the product itself, or its value, or the value added, right? Those are very different things, and we come nowhere close to an understanding of what that does. And then there's this other very loose conception from Lassalle called, fair distribution. Again, does not the bourgeoisie believe that the current conditions are fair? Is it not that I'll just read this from Marx. Do not the bourgeoisie assert that the present day distribution is fair? And is it not, in fact, the only fair distribution on the basis of the present day mode of production? Are economic relations regulated by legal concepts, or do not, on the contrary, legal relations arise out of economic ones? Have not also the social sectarians the most varied notions about fair distribution? And I think that last bit is a really important point as well. He's making this, criticism here, saying that this kind of conception of capitalism and what we're trying to do on the other side of it is so fuzzy that, again, you could be a defender of this system and use this logic to argue that actually, the free, this is what like free market economists argue, is that the distribution that people get is the wage is set by the market, which is, something that is not controlled in its, pure sense in their conception, by human beings. Rather, it's just this completely rational system that, creates order out of chaos, right? They argue that the distribution in society is fair already, right? This is something that is like, so making this point, calling for fair distribution, you're talking about morality at the end of the day. And I want to bring this text up because it is something that people need to recognize. They get worried when they hear terms like scientific socialism. And again, I'll say this, I said this on the stream on Thursday. What scientific socialism means, it's not some kind of dogmatic politics. Rather, it's looking at society from a scientific lens that allows you to understand the different relations and the different systems that are present in society, so that you can then change it. When you do what Lassalle is doing and what the Gotha Program does, is they take a scientific theory of society and capitalism and they turn it into a moral critique, right? That the distribution isn't fair. Well, no shit, it's not fair, right? But when you enter into a conversation like that and you're just basically arguing different people's moralities, you're never going to be able to get out of that swamp. And that's fundamentally, what I think Marx was so frustrated with this text. One, that it was sloppy, and two, I'm sure that that they didn't consult him to write it. But also that, you end up taking a scientific theory of society and turning it into a kind of fuzzy moral one where you're arguing about the fair distribution of the proceeds of labor, right? Which again, socialists have very different understandings of what that means. You take something that is, that is quite firm in its understanding of society, and you make it incredibly fuzzy.
Yeah, I think Marx had an opportunity to roll in his grave in November when Illinois failed to pass a graduated income tax proposal. They have a flat tax now, and they called it the Illinois fair tax. Mm-hmm. So rather than actually running on any kind of like redistribution class antagonistic, type of framing, which would have been much better from my perspective, they did this fair tax, and no one like that. Yeah, like that's fuzzy to people. People didn't understand what they were voting on. Soak the rich tax. There's a tax that might get some support from people, and I guess clarify their situation a little bit too.
No, exactly. I think that's 100% right. And there's there's no doubt about the reason that the right wing spends so much money on their messaging, because you can obscure things, and you can speak to people's moral understanding, like, the system isn't fair, so we need to have a fair tax system. And again, if you don't have a kind of strong understanding of what's going on, or honestly the time to be to be able to go through all these proposals, it's the same thing with Prop 22, right, in California, where you have these people saying we need to modernize the economy. We live in a different society. Like, those are unobjectable. Like you listen to that, it's like, yeah, of course we're living in a very different society than we were 100 years ago. But essentially what they're trying to do is they're trying to take people's understandings of the world and use them to basically create a horrible reactionary, future for us, where all of our worker protections are torn away. This is essentially what the Gotha program was doing to socialism, was taking something that was trying to help people understand the world around them, and again, just ripping it to shreds and replacing it with this very fuzzy kind of moral discourse. And this next section, I think, is this next bit of his criticism of this line, I think, is really good, and particularly on the question of equality, right? Because there's another thing that people, this is like what you learn in high school, is that what is communism? Everybody's equal, right? And that's not at all what Marx ever argued. Like, you can want that as a goal personally, I guess, but like, that's not what Marxism is ever saying. So Marx criticizes, this understanding that we get in the Gotha program. Going to basically get, the fair distribution of the proceeds of labor. And he puts it in the context of what they've been saying earlier in the text. Marx says, are these socialists prepared to talk about questions as to what to do with those who cannot work or cannot work as much as others? What is the concept of equal right of all members in society when we all engage in society in frankly unequal ways? So what you end up getting from Lassalle here is that he thinks that the problem with capitalism is just an unfair distribution of the proceeds of production. And, you have to understand, think about this, like an economist, production and consumption are parts of the capital system. Simply that's what an economy is, right? You produce and then you consume. How do you produce and who gets to consume? Those are the fundamental questions of political economy, right? And what you get from Lassalle's understanding is a fixation only on the distribution of the proceeds, fixation on the distribution of, the ability to consume. And that's a huge error if you're trying to build a socialist society, because you leave out the most fundamental societal relation, which is the fact that working people are basically, compelled to have to sell their labor because they don't have access to, because capitalism destroys their ability to survive without selling their labor and receiving a wage so that they can, buy food and house themselves and all of that. Lassalle is only focusing on the other side of production and not trying to fundamentally change the way that we produce in general, right? and this is very much something that comes out of the idealism of the Lassalle argument, because communism is not something. Communism is not, just a principle. It's an argument that within the society, there's certain forces that can fundamentally change the way that we live in society, right? The fact that the working class is the producer in society gives them this revolutionary potential to actually fundamentally change the way that society is run. And, but that's something that will come out of capitalism, right? And to build that kind of politics, you need to have a material understanding of how capitalism functions. And what you get with Lassalle is a fixation only on the distribution side and not at all on the production side.
Yeah, let's. Do we want to bring up this Zizek Peterson section where Zizek talks about this equal right part here? Or,
yeah, no, I think that's good, and we'll get to this after this bit here. But another big criticism that Marx is making is this argument about equality that we're starting to get from Lassalle, which is not a Marxist argument. In fact, it's one that he is very much against. And I think if we pull up this Zizek response to Jordan Peterson, who again has honestly like a Lassallean understanding of what socialism is. I honestly, that's probably too generous, but
here is this is from hour 39 into this 2 hour and 45-minute debate, and I mean one of the great debates. And this is one of the great moments from it here, where Zizek basically does the you don't nothing of Marx's work.
Power. So I'm not just defending Marx. I'm saying it was not clear to him, and so let's drop that. Maybe I have more interesting things to say. Another point. Nonetheless, where at one point I'm ready to claim, where did you find this? This goes maybe for today's politically correct jerks and so on, that this egalitarianism. There is one passage in his late critique of Gotha Program where Marx directly accesses the problem of equality. And he dismisses it as a strict bourgeois category. Explicitly. For him, communism is not egalitarianism. It's, yes, hierarchies, but not based on capitalism. Okay, I'm not totally defending here Marx. I'm just saying...
you don't understand him.
Don't reproduce to Marx. Okay, but to conclude, because, yes, I want to keep my promise.
And I don't think Peterson ever really addresses that.
No, he definitely, I mean, Zizek ran circles around him.
But Zizek is just amazing in that I'm not defending Marx here. Like, using those words to what he really means is I'm telling you don't know what the fuck you're talking about when it comes to Marx. Like, just strictly on a understanding terms, we're not agreeing before we can disagree on, actual Marx's beliefs. But yeah, so equal rights.
Yeah, no, I mean, and this is exactly, Zizek does a great job of describing that. But what Marx is, saying in the Gotha program is that, no, in society, like we, as just a fact, we are unequal in the sense that we're just not the same. You have some people who have extraordinary physical talents. Some people have extraordinary mental talents. Some people aren't going to be able to work as much as others. Some people just aren't going to be as productive as others.
This gets to the scientific bit, right? Where if you have to quantify labor, it's what are you going to do it by? The amount of work done or the amount of time spent doing work? Like, you can't impose equality onto those sorts of measurements across the different variables, right? They're going to be people that are differently capable for the time being. So, yeah.
And what you end up getting in this is like, what kind of system are you going to get? You're going to get a system where, you get like an hour's work certificate, and that entitles you to get a certain amount of the proceeds, of society, right? I mean, is this very fundamentally different from capitalism, right? Essentially, what you're getting from that kind of system is not this kind of emancipation of the working class, but just a slightly more equal measure of how much you can take out of society versus what you put into it, right? That's essentially what you're getting from Lassalle. And essentially, this is where Marx calls this kind of a very bourgeois, egalitarianism, a very bourgeois understanding of right and equality, because it is a limited freedom. Because again, since we aren't going into society as, physical and mental equals in all of these different ways, you are going to have people who then will be, able to amass personal wealth at a higher rate than other people. All you're doing essentially is just resetting, the system a little bit, right? You're not fundamentally changing it. Again, this is why, this criticism that Marx makes is really important, because he's trying to prevent us from going into this kind of unfortunate system where we just reproduce capitalism again, but create a different kind of distribution model. And unless you had anything there, let's juxtapose that with what Marx calls the higher phase of communist society. Because I think this is what this text is. There's a lot in this text that's really rich, but this is one of the most important arguments that Marx makes. And I'll just read directly from the Gotha Program. In a higher phase of communist society, after the enslaving subordination of the individual to the division of labor, and therewith also the antithesis between mental and physical labor has vanished, after labor has become not only a means of life, but life's prime want, after the productive forces have also in the all-around development of the individual and all the springs of cooperative wealth flow more abundantly, only then can the narrow horizon of bourgeois right be crossed in its entirety, and society inscribe on its banners, from each according to his ability, to each according to his need. So that is, if you want communism in a line, that is what it is, from each according to his ability, to each according to his needs, right? You are destroying the system of capitalism that obscures those two relationships, right? Because in our society now, we don't receive according to our needs, right? Some people receive massive amounts of wealth. Some people enjoy massive amounts of wealth, which is not at all reflective of their personal needs. You don't really have to go too far in that critique to understand it. And then the second argument, that when you live in a society, in a kind of communist society, and again, this is an argument that Marx is saying is not something that you can just flip, right? This is not a kind of idealist thing that you can just walk in, we take over the government, tomorrow we're going to live under this system. Rather, it's something that we will, evolve to out of the system that we're living in. But this is the fundamental goal, is that we live in a society where we all, contribute what we can, right, to society through labor. And then we have all of our needs met. And it's the destruction of the rat race. It's the destruction of the forced starvation, all of the flaws of capitalism that make life, frankly, miserable for most of us. We erase that kind of system and replace it with something that meets our needs, and also gives us a kind of responsibility to also, meet society's needs as well, because you're thinking of yourself as a member of a society rather than just kind of an individual. Anyway, so that's a really critical point. And then the last bit of this first section, Marx also criticized is a good burn, I think. So this is the line: the emancipation of labor must be the work of the working class, relative to which all other classes are only one reactionary mass. And Marx responds to this: let him understand who can. Yeah, which is such a great line.
Yeah, we should go over like the edit that was changed. So yeah, from the rules of the International, the original was: the emancipation of the working class must be the act of the workers themselves, and then it was improved. Here, on the contrary, the working class has to emancipate what? Labor? Like, let him understand who can. Yeah, that's like, you can imagine Marx doing that in a quote tweet.
I think you would have been good at that. No, but this is a fundamental point too. And this is actually why I thought about this text, because we were talking on Thursday about that moron Noah Bertowski, and his labels of class reductionist, calling Marx a class reductionist. Well, you actually see the exact opposite here, from Marx. If people would imagine, people imagine Marx is just writing, the working class is the best and they're going to change everything. And, they're only people who matter, right? He literally never says anything like that. And in fact is, insulting somebody for that kind of literally, again, class reductionist. The way that, our opponents put, socialists out there don't really exist. But this is a kind of class reductionist argument that you're getting from Lassalle, is that everyone else other than the proletariat is a reactionary mass. And Marx again says, this is absurd. It doesn't even line up with what we wrote in the manifesto. This is from the Communist Manifesto. Of all the classes that stand face to face with the bourgeoisie today, the proletariat alone is a really revolutionary class. The other classes decay and finally disappear in the face of modern industry. The proletariat is its special and essential product. So again, Marx isn't saying here that the proletariat, like fuck everybody else, right? He's saying that what capitalism does is it actually reduces all other classes, all other ways of being in society, reduces us into these two major classes that are constantly, that are in conflict and are developing, that all these other classes are developing into one of those two classes. We should maybe one day spend some time with like the analytical Marxists, because they spend a lot of time trying to negotiate this, because it is difficult, because we all do live, in a society where we are interacting with the world around us in very different ways. Depending on class and culture and race and all of these other factors. Again, Marx doesn't reject this. What he is arguing here is that the way that history is moving is to reduce all other ways of being into being, proletarian. Mm-hmm. Honestly, even look at the PMC, and let's specifically look at academia. What's going on in the United States right now when it comes to academia is you're seeing this class that is, historically privileged class, even, before capitalism, of, the scholar, who has always been able to a liberal society, the idea is that they're able to stand outside of society in a way, even in their relationship to production. What have you seen in the past, 40 years with the university system in this country? These professors and scholars are becoming proletarianized in mass. Not everybody, but think about,
adjuncts,
adjunct professors, exactly, grad student workers. All of these people are finding themselves more and more close to the proletarian than to this kind of, intelligentsia class that had existed before. That's the point that Marx is making, is that all these other distinctions, the way that history is moving is, as he said, the Communist Manifesto, the other classes decay and finally disappear. That's what you're starting to see. It's not that there aren't extremely privileged members of the intelligentsia, the academia and all that, I think it'd be a little bit difficult to call them properly proletarian, right? But rather that even within this class, they are being pulled into, the ranks of the proletariat. And that, anyways, that's the kind of fundamental, point that Marx makes. And again, it's the same thing with the peasantries, that the peasantry, in Marxism, they argue, is too becoming proletarianized, right? Because the older system of, you're farming, you're farming, small farmers, essentially, you own, I guess, your land and your production in some level, but you're not fully engrossed into like the capitalist production system as what we see today with modern agriculture, where the farm workers are completely proletarianized as well, right? All of these classes, are shifting in clearly in one direction. And that's the real kind of class argument that Marx is making here. And he also, just to wrap up this section too, he also makes this point about the bourgeoisie. Again, sometimes people are very surprised to hear how Marx write about the bourgeoisie, because he does also call them a revolutionary class, because they revolutionized society out of feudalism, out of the forms of production. And this is a really great point that Marx makes too. The proletariat is revolutionary relative to the bourgeoisie because, having itself grown up on the basis of large-scale industry, it strives to strip off from production the capitalist character that the bourgeoisie seeks to perpetuate. And I really love this line, and it reminds me, not to be all hoity-toity or anything like that, but it reminds me of one of my favorite lines of Derrida. Derrida wrote this book called Spectres of Marx, which honestly, as political analysis, is extremely fussy. But he does have this really poetic line that I do like about Marxism, where he calls it the only suicidal philosophy. And what does he mean by that? It's the only philosophy that actually wants to undo the system that it analyzes. Like Marxism, like once we move into communism, like Marxism will frankly, in a lot of ways, won't be as useful as it is today, right? Because it's the only society that philosophy that fundamentally wants to eradicate what makes itself possible. And that's the same thing with the proletariat too. A lot of people think that, what communists want to do is to turn everyone into proletariat. It's the opposite. Rather, by the proletariat as a class too is suicidal in the sense that it wants to destroy the conditions that make it a proletariat. And actually from that, we will see the abolition of class as a concept at all in society. Right. And it's a really cool and poetic way to think about it. But it's really critical to think about class in that way, is that like what we are trying to do is we're seeing everyone be proletarianized. And as socialists, what we're trying to do is actually destroy the conditions that turn any of us into any member of a class. And that's the real radical potential of the proletariat compared to the bourgeoisie, because the bourgeoisie was radical because it wanted to, erase the kind of, the former systems of class, which a lot of them were related to production. But, if you think about like untouchables or things like that, a lot of them were, related to, superstition and religion of that nature. The bourgeoisie fundamentally changed that class dynamic by destroying, the monarchy and those kind of systems. So it was radical in that sense, but it's not radical in the sense that it won't go the next step. And that's where the radical potential of the proletariat is. We can move on to these last couple of bits. I might need your help here because I'm moving off of my notes to make sure I'm not skipping any sections, but we have here the free state bit, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and the iron will of
the iron law of wages.
Yeah, which sets up some more funny Marx at the end of this. But yeah, do you just want to introduce the iron law of wages?
So let's read this first section in the Gotha program that Marx is criticizing. Starting from these basic principles, the German Workers' Party, by all legal means for the free state and social society, that the abolition of the wage system together with the iron law of wages and exploitation in every form, the elimination of all social and political inequality. So Marx, promises to return to the free state as well, very soon. But first he takes aim at the iron law of wages, which is something that Lassalle came up with, which is his basic philosophy.
Well, I just want to go to the second paragraph here. It is well known that nothing of the iron law of wages is Lassalle's except the word iron, borrowed from Goethe, great eternal iron laws.
It's so good. Yeah, I mean, I can briefly explain what this philosophy is. Essentially, it's this idea that there is a ceiling of possible wages, right? And as more people, let me make sure I'm getting this right. As more people are introduced into the wage system, actually collapse. Because there is like a limited amount of money,
as more people are entered into the wage system, it will eventually collapse, you said, right?
Yeah. As more people enter into the wage system, it will eventually collapse and you'll just see wages decline fundamentally and forever. And this, again, does not come from a criticism of capitalism, but rather a kind of an argument of limit, that there's actually, it's like only so much possible in the world. There's only just so many resources in the world that once you hit a certain limit, everyone is just going to have to see their standards of living reduced. And this is not a unique argument to wages. This is something that constantly gets popped up as a very kind of human fixation. It's the same thing with like the overpopulation fixation.
Malthus,
yeah, it's Malthus, right? We're just going to reach a moment where there's just not going to be enough, and everyone's standard of living is going to to fall. Yeah. And Marx makes arguments that capitalism, that there is a declining rate of profit, but it's not from this, right? And this is, again, why Marx is criticizing him, because it's an absurd kind of formulation, because it completely ignores the role that capitalism plays in distributing and producing those wages, which is why they're actually falling, and instead creates this wild notion that it's just because we're just living in a limited world. And he has a really hilarious line that I think will help me explain this better, talking about slavery.
Yeah.
So basically what Marx goes on, to argue, is one, that if Lassalle is correct in this law, that this law is iron, right? That means it can never be abolished. And it will exist in each, social system from here on out, including in the socialist system, right? So you can't abolish this law by Lassalle's own logic. Again, this law is wrong, but Marx is making the that like even on insane world Lassalle, like your concepts don't stand up to scrutiny. And essentially they make this argument that poverty has its basis in nature, which is not true. Poverty is a result of a social system that robs the working people and impoverishes everybody, right? This is a social system, not some kind of natural law. And again, this is a really important distinction to make too, between a materialist versus like a kind of squishy understanding of politics or an idealist understanding of politics. When you start to make the reality, like poverty, for example, if you start to make that seem natural or a moral question, because that's what it becomes. It becomes a moral question. How much poverty can we accept in society? Rather than a kind of scientific understanding, like actually, no, poverty is the result of the social system that we're living under, and that is a system that we can change. That is why Marx is so against this kind of understanding. One, because in addition to the fact that it's extremely unscientific. So to hit on this further, Marx makes a very hilarious argument about using this kind of formulation with slavery, right? So this is from the text. It is as if among slaves who have at last got behind the secret of slavery and broken out in rebellion, a slave still enthralled to obsolete notions were to inscribe on the program of the rebellion, slavery must be abolished because the feeding of the slaves in the system of slavery cannot exceed a certain low maximum. Right? Again, so like that would be an absurd reason to, oppose slavery. The reasons you oppose slavery are quite obvious. And that's what Marx's point here is that like this kind of bizarre conception that Lassalle's putting forward, the iron law of wages, is fixating on the wrong thing and will actually look incredibly hilarious on the other side of the critique. Or if we enter into a new system, that some guy was arguing that the problem with capitalism was that you can only have so many at a certain wage. So I don't have Marx's ability to really make kind of technical arguments like that, slap as well as he can, but these ones will be a little bit quicker because they're just not as juicy as part one. Part one, for people who want to spend some time reading this, I think is really one of the the wealthier parts of the text. But part three says the German Workers' Party, in order to pave way to the solution of the social question, demands the establishment of producers' cooperatives societies with state aid under the democratic control of the toiling people. The producers' cooperation societies are to be called into being for industry and agriculture on such a scale that the socialist organization of the total labor will arise from them. So, he makes this good point too, is like, what kind of a conception of the state is this? So in this argument here, the working people actually do not seize control of the state, but rather are relying on state aid. That basically they just get to be in control of, where the state is, basically giving people, grants, to build a bunch of co-ops. And again, he makes an interesting criticism of the co-op form too, that, maybe we could do a little bit of a return to this down the line. Don't get it wrong. Marx is not against cooperative or the cooperative model. But he's saying this is an extremely limited view of socialism, because essentially what you're doing is it is important, and this is from Marx, co-ops are of value insofar as they are independent creations of the workers and not proteges of either the governments or the bourgeois, right? So he says, like, these are really important developments. So he's not against cooperatives, but he is saying, like, if this is your end goal, right, you can barely call yourself a socialist because you are not fundamentally changing the relation in society. You're just sort of redistributing, a bit of control, right? And this is not the kind of radical break. Again, what we talked about earlier when Marx said the communist society will inscribe on its banners from each according to his ability to each according to their need, right? This is not building that kind of system. This is actually very much staying within a capitalist mode of production, which is a reshuffling. It would be a reshuffling that would be immensely more equitable. Don't get us wrong, but it's not this kind. They're supposed to be communists. They're supposed to be changing this whole society, and it's a kind of, it would be a strange destination for the radical parties that are literally being outlawed and oppressed in all of these countries. That all they want to do is just build a couple more cooperatives in Germany.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like unless you have more to say, I feel like the next part is probably still second juiciest compared to the first, right?
Yeah, I think so.
This is where he gets back to the free state. Let's say you had more to say on the.
No, I think that's perfect. Do you want to set that up?
Yeah, so Marx himself says, I now come to the democratic section, and the part he's quoting is the free basis of the state.
Well, he makes the funny argument is like, what do you mean by free state? What is this? Do you mean setting the state free?
Right. Yeah. It's like, because that sense of freedom, right? Historically, freedom, I mean, America's sense, this is terribly apparent. Edmund Morgan has a book on colonial Virginia called American Freedom, American Slavery, about how those two concepts, freedom and slavery, arise dependent on each other. And then it's not only an American thing. That happened in, Roman times too, that people start talking about freedom when they have the ability to command people to do all the work for them. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, I think that's what does free state mean? What would a free Bismarckian Germany do? Or I guess it would be Bismarckian at that point, but you know what they're saying.
And it's also a kind of bizarre way of thinking about the state. And this is something I will say, I think we actually will have to come back to, because state theory in Marxism is actually very contentious. So this is what Marx's argument about it, but people like Poulantzas and Ralph Miliband have developed a very different understanding of the state, particularly from Lenin's understanding. But Lenin got a lot of his understanding of the state from Marx. And, he makes the argument here that freedom consists in converting the state from an organ superimposed upon society into one completely subordinate to it. So, how does he mean that? Like, functionally, what he's arguing here, or a kind of Marxist understanding of the state, is that the state sits on top of society and it allows capitalism to function, right, through the legal system and all these kind of arguments. What the state will do under a communist system, this is where Marx has this very famous line about the state withering away, is that instead of the state actually sitting on top of society and dictating to everybody what to do, the state, and this is the line from Marx when he says, the state will go from the managing of people into the managing of things, right? And what does he mean by that? I mean, functionally, what the state will do, it will be the kind of organizational structure that we need to, distribute goods and to implement from each according to their ability, to each according to their need, right? And then that system becomes fundamentally different from the kind of state system that we have today, or even some kind of formulations of state socialism, because you won't need the state to basically come in and, infringe on people's, rights or freedoms, because society will be functioning in a way that a lot of the ills that the state comes in to fix won't be there anymore, right? And not having that kind of conception of what a state can be, again, you're just bringing capitalism, the former system, capitalism, into the future. You're bringing it into the supposed socialist move, which is supposed to be this kind of radical break with that.
Yeah, I mean, is it too early to get to the income tax bit here specifically?
No, I think that's perfect.
Yeah, and I think this is very interesting in the way it makes the state dependent on those classes continuing to exist, and not just as a means to try to attack the wealth and expropriate the wealth of those classes, right? It'd be one thing if taxes were completely to try to stop certain activities from even be profitable in society, but really they're setting their agreements with partners.
Mm-hmm. No, exactly. And again, too, needing income tax or tax in general for the state to function means relying on the kind of capitalist system as well, right? You tax out of the productive, system. And so you're reliant on, capitalist production continuing in the same way. And there's an interesting argument here too, actually, unless you had anything else on this section about about education, which I think is really phenomenal here, because public schools are definitely are a socialist creation. They come out of the working class movement. The demand is incredibly important to building a new future, right? This is something, especially in the 1800s, though, was quite radical still. But Marx makes this has a quibble with this demand here, and it's really important, actually, especially knowing what happened with societies like the Soviet Union or even China. So this is from the Gotha Program. The German Workers' Party demands as an ethical basis of the state, universal and equal elementary education by the state, universal compulsory school attendance, free instruction. And he makes the first argument that this is not looking at a new kind of society. These things exist in the United States, and they exist in Switzerland. So you're not really anyway. Like you're not society is sort of moving in a direction anyway. So this demand is sort of not as critical, but he really is frustrated with the idea of state education, which I think is incredibly interesting. He's not against obviously free schooling, but he doesn't like the idea of the state sending in operatives into communities to educate people. He would rather having the communities educate themselves and have that be funded by society at large, right? And that's a really interesting debate in education that I'm not too well versed in, but between kind of like hardcore, national standards versus, community education, which is interesting too. And also, we all want to avoid a kind of, society where, the state is dictating to us, what is, education standards. And also, exactly like the history that we can learn and all of that kind of stuff, right? Marx is like seeing that why this could be really dangerous to develop. Particularly because he's living in Germany, an incredibly, oppressive regime at that point. He doesn't want the German government to be the ones coming into society and telling everybody, okay, these are the books you have to read, or this is what you need to know.
And I mean, this is why I have trouble with people who identify as Marxists that just say the obvious solution to our sort of technological communication platform monopoly problem is just to seize it all by the state. Mm-hmm. And it's like, yeah. I don't think the U.S. government or the DOJ or whoever is going to be put in charge of that is really who you want, making these decisions.
No, I think you're 100% right. And
ultimately, if we had if we had transitioned to a communist society, or even we were on the transition phase, maybe we would have, a better system to administer this stuff. But we're not even close.
Mm-hmm. No, exactly. But also, it's the way that people will consider, what the state is. Like, you need to have a Marxist understanding of what the state is really to get this point. And what do I mean? Understand that the state in this system that we live in, the United States, is a system that is completely dominated by the class interests of the bourgeoisie, right? And there are people who think that emboldening the state in general will lead to, liberation only if we are in control of that system, only we, meaning, the working class, so, and then under like a working class system, you won't need the state to function in the same way, because all of the functions that the state currently plays in our society will be played, socially, instead of relying on kind of state apparatus. And this is a fundamental Marxist position. Like, this is fundamental to Marxism. And it's very funny to see people missed that Marx was very, very critical of relying too much on the state to be able to create the new kind of society. Because again, this is an organ of oppression. This is an organ that was designed to, basically reproduce a system of capitalism and hold people in line if they are to deviate from it, right? That's what the state functionally does. And, again, like, Marx is very critical of that and is very worried about these kind of ideas that, we're going to be able to, wield the state ourselves, right?
What's your pitch on the dictatorship of the proletariat?
I mean, we live under people misunderstand that quote a lot. Particularly, I think it's better to understand that quote in opposition to what we're living under now, which is the chip of the bourgeoisie. And that's the kind of fundamental Marxist point, is that we live in a society, again, the state is dominated by bourgeois interests, right? That's what it functionally does, is it operates as the organ of bourgeois power. They have power in the workplace, and then they also rely on the state to protect them and to maintain their power. The dictatorship of the proletariat is the opposite relation, where no longer do you have this powerful organ that belongs to the bourgeoisie, but rather this is in the hands of the working class, and that means working to eradicate the privileges and benefits that the bourgeoisie have, with the goal not of subverting everybody into like a miserly life, but rather to abolish class as a useful category in general. Like that's what fundamentally the dictatorship of the proletariat means.
Yeah, I mean, Marx mentions the Paris Commune. I think later when you hear I'm most familiar with Orwell talking about the moments in the Spanish Revolution. That's where a classless society had emerged for a brief moment in time, and then ultimately crushed. I want to quote from Peter Linebaugh in Counterpunch. He is an afterword to Karl Marx's Critique of the Gotha Program. He says, "We are familiar with the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie. The democratic levelers of the 1640s were followed by the dictator Cromwell. The insurgent Jacobins of the 1790s were followed by the Emperor Napoleon. The Russian Bolsheviks of the 1920s were followed by Stalin. Marx had learned from the Paris Commune that the proletariat cannot simply take over the state and use it for its own purposes. It must smash the state." And then there's just another historical note I found interesting. W.B. Du Bois intended to call his chapter on black Reconstruction in South Carolina the dictatorship of the black proletariat in South Carolina, but changed it to simply the black proletariat in South Carolina. He made this change after it was brought to his attention that since universal suffrage does not lead to a real dictatorship until workers use their votes consciously to rid themselves of the dominion of private capital. There are signs of such an object among South Carolina Negroes, but it was always coupled with the idea of that day that the only real escape for a laborer was himself to own capital.
I think that puts it extremely well. Yeah, I think, and especially the kind of consciousness aspect of it too. And this is kind of fundamental actually to like the Marxist understanding. It's like you have to have this kind of consciousness because you can get to a position where your power is increasing, but without that kind of general consciousness, we're not going to know what to do with it, and we'll revert, to the present way of doing things. Yeah. I think, that's the text, y'all. I think, just really briefly, I'll just sum up. Like, I think this text is really great because it challenges you as a reader to sort of go through some of the sloppy notions that you have. I think it does a really interesting job at making the point that like socialism is not just about, making so don't get me wrong. Like we want everyone to have higher wages, right? But socialism is not just about, if we got everybody, if we got minimum wage to $25 an hour, we won't be satisfied because we actually fundamentally want to change this entire system of production. I think it does a really great job at, articulating that kind of understanding of what socialism means. And then obviously, it's a really eloquent way of describing what a communist society could be like when he says from each according to their need to each according to their ability. I love the criticism of the state at the end. I think we actually should maybe sometime get some people who are really well versed in state theory to sort of go through that, because that is a philosophy that does develop and actually goes in a different way within Marxism after Marx passes. So those debates are actually very interesting. But yeah, this is a really rich text. It's hilarious.
It is super funny.
I know you probably don't expect to read a text like this and to laugh, but you really will.
I mean, if you've enjoyed laughing at Duncan on liberals, I mean, that's kind of what Marx is doing a little bit here. I wanted to put this to you, maybe as a follow-up to this, the program of the Workers' Party with the preamble and the political and economic sections there. It seems to me like these are sort of like the two I don't know how to say it, rails of Marx, like what he's comfortable with being done in his name. And I don't know, are you terribly familiar with the program of the Workers' Party? This is the one where, eventually after falling out with Jules Gesde, he said, if this is Marxism, I'm not a Marxist, or something like that.
Yeah. I know that's an interesting one because if I remember correctly, they completely refused the minimum program, right? For the maximum program.
Right. And the only reason I'm a little bit confused is because that you're right. That's how it's phrased, but I don't, in my brain, I can't figure out what is meant by the minimum and maximum program. Is the maximum the original section here? I'll just share it with you.
Yeah. I'm pulling it up right now. I mean, it's a really short one.
Yeah.
Again,
is the preamble and political section the maximum section, or because there's 3 sections here and neither of them are labeled maximum or minimum?
Yeah, so in the economic section, they have these basic kind of reforms that they can make, right? Legal minimum wage, protective supervision. I don't know what that is.
Like stuff we've heard of, basically.
Yeah, like essentially like workers' movement demands, right? Responsibility of society for the old and the disabled, Social Security. Like you read these actually, you're like, wow, this is essentially what becomes, social democracy, program. Marx wrote this, and they put at the beginning the political section, which is those are the radical demands. That's the abolition of all laws over the press, removal of the suppression of the public debt, abolition of standing armies and the general army of the people, the commune to be the master of its administration and its police. Right?
Yeah, especially 4 and 5 are the 2 that you're going to need probably a revolution to do.
So what this like debate is about essentially is that Marx is saying like we have a perfectly good list of demands of things that we say, because what this is the program of the party. It's like this is what we want to do when we come into power, right? And the economic section is a way to say to people like, look, we can fundamentally change our relationship, we can change the conditions of our work and make it better. These are some really, easy things that we can do to alleviate the suffering that people are feeling right now. And also to, test their strength and gain power and, and to get a foothold in the society, to make the working class stronger. Right. And what you end up having is this kind of like over fixation that like, these are reforms. And, we need to, do the most radical program possible. And that's when Marx.
Yeah, apparently Guzdas, or I don't know how to pronounce that name, but they basically thought that all the demands were implausible under even reformism. And as we know, a lot of this stuff wasn't implausible. And Marx is like, well, how would you characterize Marx's response? I was looking for that letter. Maybe when we do this episode, we'll go deeper into that.
Yeah, I don't have the letter in front of me, but essentially he calls them. I mean, it's a really fiery letter from Marx. He calls them all stupid, essentially. Yeah. It says like these are things, as I was saying earlier, that will have direct benefit in people's life, and you have to give people victories, right? We have to develop to a stage where we can,
that's useful actually. Not the material benefit is great, and actually people shouldn't discount that at all. And also doing good for people in that way is useful for a political project.
Exactly. And he argues that like people just won't be sated. If you give them these reforms, they're going to demand more. And then Marx has this really famous line, which is oftentimes like quoted by right wingers who don't understand what it's in reference to, but Marx has this famous line where he says, if this is Marxism, then I'm not a Marxist, which is, it'd be awesome to be able to use your name like that in a verb.
Exactly. That's the ultimate flex.